Welcome back to a new video. My name is Felix. I'm a time-lapse and hyperlapse photographer from Berlin, Germany, and in today's video I will show you how to capture and edit smooth cinematic hyperlapse videos. Up front we have to do a quick gear talk, but the truth is for hyperlapse the gear doesn't really matter. The only thing you will need is something that can take photos. Whether you own a professional mirrorless camera or a smartphone, the technique is what makes a difference. However, there are a couple of things which can make your life easier when creating hyperlapses. First one are full menu controls for aperture, ISO and shutter speed, because having full menu control can help you avoid flickering in your final hyperlapse sequence. Another useful tool is a grid or center marker on your screen or smartphone, which can help you when framing your hyperlapse. When it comes to choosing the right focal length, I recommend something in the 24mm range. If you go wider, this can lead to a lot of perspective change in the corners of your image, which can give you a hard time in post-production. Last but not least, you will need steady hands. And that's it. So let's go out and shoot a hyperlapse. Once you're on location and found a subject you want to shoot a hyperlapse of, it's time to look around and find a path to follow for your hyperlapse. Take a look around and try to find some natural patterns or lines. Curbs or cobblestone usually make a great guide to follow along. The next step is to set up your camera. Switch to manual mode so you have full control over all of the camera settings. Depending on your focal length, use the longest shutter speed, which will still give you sharp images. Using the longest shutter speed possible will give you some motion blur in the final video and also reduce flickering. There is a very simple formula to find the longest shutter speed you can use depending on the focal length, which is minimum shutter speed equals focal length by 2. For example, if you're shooting on a 24mm lens, the longest shutter speed you should use is 1/50. If your camera or lens have in-body or in-lens stabilization, you can go longer, but I recommend to test up those limits first before starting to create a hyperlapse. Once you've selected a shutter speed, it's time to select an ISO value. I recommend to go as low as possible for the cleanest image and then adjust the aperture for a properly exposed image. Now turn on the grid on your camera. I usually go with the 6x4 grid and then take a look on your subject. Try to find an area of high contrast or a unique feature on whatever you're shooting a hyperlapse of. This can be the corner of a building, a clock in a church tower, or something similar. This spot will be the anchor point for your hyperlapse. Now align this point with one of the intersecting lines of the grid, and in the next steps when shooting the hyperlapse, this anchor point will stay in the same spot of the image for every photo you're gonna take. Last but not least, check your battery and SD card space. Once you're all set, it's finally time to start capturing the hyperlapse. To capture the hyperlapse, you have to follow this rhythm. Photo, step, align, photo, step, align, and repeat over and over again. Let me break it down. You take your first photo with your anchor point aligned with one of the grid intersections on the screen. Then you take one step. When taking those steps, try to be as consistent as possible. Try to use natural patterns like cobblestones or big concrete steps, so your steps are always the same distance. Once you've taken a step, make sure you're standing rock solid, realign your anchor point with the grid intersection and take a photo again. And now you have to repeat this process over and over again. While capturing your hyperlapse, you should also check the photos from time to time. If you run into any issues like blurry or overexposed images, I highly recommend to restart shooting the hyperlapse with proper settings instead of trying to fixing it in post. Once you've captured at least 100 photos, it's time to head back to the office for editing. I have already imported all of the images into Lightroom, and now the first step is to switch to develop mode to edit this first picture. I will not go into detail here because everybody has a different taste when it comes to editing. The only important thing you need to watch out for in Lightroom are the sliders. Don't use any crazy values. Especially for the contrast, blacks and whites, I recommend keeping them between -50 and +50 because this will help you avoid introducing flickering in your final hyperlapse sequence. Same goes for the clarity slider, which I wouldn't touch at all. But as before, this is just a guideline and I highly encourage you to test out the different settings and see what sliders might introduce flickering or how they will affect the final look of your hyperlapse videos. Once you've finished editing your first photo, open up the film roll on the bottom of Lightroom and select all of the photos by using the shortcut Command A. Then go to Sync, make sure all settings are selected and then synchronize all of the settings from the first image to all of the others. Now it's time to export those photos. Make sure all of the photos are still selected. Make a right click, go to Export, choose a folder. I'm gonna go with the desktop here and put them in a subfolder called JPEG. For file settings, I'm gonna use JPEG, quality 100%. Everything else I leave as it is. Click Export. Wait a couple of seconds until your Lightroom has finished exporting your JPEG files. Once Lightroom finished exporting your JPEG files, it's time to switch over to Premiere Pro for stabilizing the hyperlapse sequence. I've already opened up a fresh project here, and down in the project window you will find the Import Media button and navigate to the folder where you save the JPEG files. Select the first one, go down to Show Options and make sure Image Sequence is selected. Then click Import. If you double click the video, you will see Premiere already created a video file from your photos. Down in the project window, make a right click on your image sequence, scroll down to New Sequence from Clip. With your new sequence selected, go to Effects and search for Warp Stabilizer. Just type in Warp. You will see Warp Stabilizer pop up. Double click to apply this effect. You will see a blue badge analyzing in background pop up on your sequence window. And while Premiere is analyzing the clips, we need to change some settings. So go to Effect Controls. Just gonna put this one down here. You can see the settings better. Scroll down a bit. And there are a couple of settings we can change in the Warp Stabilizer settings. The first one is the smoothness value. I usually recommend starting with low values between 5 and 15%. For handheld hyperlapses, I usually go with 15%. Also, I change the method to perspective. And as I said before, there is no right or wrong here, and you need to try out different settings to see which fits your hyperlapse workflow. The settings I used are a good starting point for handheld hyperlapses. I recommend starting with 15% of smoothness and the perspective method, and then wait for Premiere Pro to stabilize. Once Warp Stabilizer has finished analyzing, we can do a playback here of our clip. And as you can see, it already is looking pretty smooth. At this stage, I wouldn't change anything else because to me, this hyperlapse looks super smooth. If your hyperlapse is still a bit wobbly or shaky at this stage, let me show you how to apply Warp Stabilizer again for the smoothest results possible. Go back to the project panel, make a right click on the sequence you've just stabilized, scroll down to New Sequence from Clip again. Now in this new sequence, Warp Stabilizer is not applied. Go back to Effects, double click Warp Stabilizer, go to Effect Controls and change the settings to 15% for smoothness, the method to perspective. In general, I recommend using values between 1 and 15% for smoothness and applying Warp Stabilizer multiple times. Using this method, you will be able to stabilize almost every hyperlapse, but as I have said before, there is no right or wrong. So I recommend to try the different settings and see how they affect the stabilization process. Once you're happy with the smoothness and look of the final hyperlapse, you can export it, share it with your friends and family on Instagram to get millions of likes or add it to an existing project. And that was how to create super smooth hyperlapses without any fancy gear. I hope you learned something new today, and if you are interested in learning more about time-lapse and hyperlapse photography, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you for watching, see you in the next one, bye bye.